artificial intelligence is right now in its threat to our industry and what appraisers do.
Appraisers have always had the responsibility to extract that answer from the market, given the tools and the data that's available to them.
Season 2 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. We're excited to start this season, Jeff. In season 1, we covered at length PAREA, going in depth to what it is, why it's good, talking to some folks that have come out of it, those that have been involved in creating it. We'll be anxious to be covering updates with PAREA in future episodes here, including this episode, talking about a few things that are ongoing with the program. But in season 2 and moving beyond, we're hoping to discuss current topics, interview interesting people in and around business and real estate, as well as diving deep into some topics that aren't often discussed a lot. So I look forward to going in detail with that and seeing where we can take this.
Could be a good time. I hope we bring a unique perspective that will resonate not just with the appraisal community, but with others out there. Appraisal and real estate valuation touches a lot of people out there, from homeowners to buyers to real estate agents, lenders. There's a whole lot of people that care about what's happening in the real estate market. We hope to be able to share a unique perspective on what's going on and why things are happening the way they are sometimes.
Beautiful. Behind the scenes here, this is the first time you and I are recording this together. We have no production capability to show that we're in the same room together, but we are. So that's great. And in this episode, we'll be kind of talking about the reconsideration of value process. We are at and just left the Valuation Expo, also talking a little bit about Peria hesitancy that we're seeing out in the marketplace. So look forward to diving deep into those topics. Reconsideration of value requests. Fannie Mae's got a new policy here. We heard a lot about it at the conference that we were just at. Thought we'd talk about it a little bit. It's a topic fresh on appraisers' minds, fresh on realtors' minds, fresh on underwriters' minds, fresh on buyers' minds, so and mortgage officers. So it's a lot of folks. Jeff, what is this reconsideration of value process?
Yeah, so there's always been room for a disagreement with the value, and most lenders over the years have adopted a process by which they can responsibly reconsider a value when an appraisal is completed and then turned in. The problem is that there hasn't been a lot of consistency or expectations around that. So sometimes appraisers would get nothing more than, hey, we think the value's wrong, to, hey, here are 20 other sales in the neighborhood that sold for a higher price than what you appraised my property for, and kind of anything in between. And so what's happened is Fannie Mae, in conjunction with Freddie Mac, has put together a process that spells out some responsibilities and some rights that the borrower in the transaction has, because ultimately the borrower is impacted by the appraised value. Obviously, they end up at the end of the day paying for the appraisal, usually through loan funding proceeds. They spell out some rights and some responsibilities that the appraiser has, and then some responsibilities that the lenders have. And I think the long and short of it for me is that the borrowers do have an opportunity. There's a formalized process by which they can say, hey, we think there's something wrong with this appraisal, and here's what we think it is. The formalized process says you only have one shot at it. So if you don't like the conclusion, you can't go back 4, 5, 6 times saying, hey, we want you to think about this and that and that. The appraiser has the obligation to give a fair assessment, a good faith effort, I think is what I heard the Fannie Mae representative call it, in reconsidering the information that's there. So whether it's sales in the market, whether it's factual information about the property, it's those kinds of things that can be presented to the appraiser. The Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are worried about appraiser independence. They don't want there to be subversive pressure on the appraiser saying, essentially, hey, if you don't give us the number we want, you're not going to get our work from us. That there needs to be that integrity, I think, in the appraisal process. But there also needs to be the responsibility on the appraiser side to make sure that that they're considering, kind of holistically, the information that's out there. Sometimes it will result in a change, sometimes it won't. But that's kind of in a nutshell. I think what they're trying to do is codify this process so that it's more consistent and better understood across the board.
Certainly, it is nothing new. The reconsideration of value process. It lacks structure in the general, conventional, and FHA lending process, but we know the process very well through through VA, we've called Tidewater, and I think that's worked really well for folks to be able to do that. I think zooming out, I work with a lot of appraisers. I am one. I see. I think that probably the single biggest source of confusion and poor reputation for appraisers, and ultimately kind of thorns in the appraiser side, is this public thought that there is one value that any reasonable professional should come to in a single property. And that if the professional that did theirs didn't come to that single value that everyone should be coming to, that we have a big problem. And so if anybody walks away from an appraisal, every homeowner, as purchaser for sure, thinks they got the best deal or the deal of the century in purchasing their property. And so when they have questions about appraisal that go unanswered, kind of talk bad about that appraisal and the process for years to come. That's sort of the only interface that they have with the appraisal process. And so the public doesn't really understand that two well-intentioned, good professionals can come to quite different numbers and be reasonable both. I think there probably often is one a little more correct than the other. I think when you go through sort of forensic analysis, but generally that sort of stuff is there. And so if a homeowner thinks the value is quite different and has the opportunity to present some data for the appraiser to consider, and the appraiser disagrees, at least they have put out a reasonable and thoughtful explanation of why the data presented was not there.
Exactly, Mark. And I think people have day-to-day experience with this. When you go buy a car, when you go purchase anything that you're going to negotiate for, there's not only ever one right price that particular car, its make and model, is going to bring. And same thing with a house. I think that those that deal in real estate transactions on a fairly regular basis come to realize that you'll have a range of offer prices when you're marketing the home in the first place. Obviously, the seller wants to get the most they can. The buyer wants to get the lowest price, the best price they can. And similarly in appraisal, there's typically a reasonable range to which you can come and be well supported and be within our professional standards and ethics as an appraiser. But I think what this ROV process is striving to address is when you're outside of what you might expect to be a normal range of variance within professionals, looking at kind of an imperfect market with limited, comparable sales to consider. When something factual was missed, omitted, or overlooked, it warrants consideration. And what they're trying to do is give ultimately the consumer a consistent way to go ahead and get that addressed. And hopefully the appraiser on the back end is addressing that, in a good faith way. I've had an ROV where data was presented I just didn't have at the time, made a change in value, and didn't feel like I was being pressured to value. I felt like if I got better data, I'm going to go with the best information in the market. If it was unfortunate I didn't have it at the time, I'm grateful to have it in a reconsideration process. And my hope is that appraisers will adopt that mentality. And when it's warranted, make the appropriate decisions. If the information presented is not as good as what they had in the first place, it may be appropriate not to make changes at times. But regardless of the outcome, the appraiser should be explaining what they did and why, whether they made a change or not. It should be pretty clear to any end user. If it was warranted, here's why. If it wasn't, here's why. And it should be well spelled out.
The not so quiet secret, Jeff, is that appraisers often look at these extra comps to consider and reconsiderations of value as a complete waste of time and look very quickly to dismiss. We find certainly in our business that this is the greatest opportunity to reduce liability from the appraiser's perspective, to understand what the reader of the report, the borrower, is thinking when they look at your report, and not have to go through the state to get an explanation of why the data they think is better isn't better, or an opportunity to include it in the appraisal process. And so I think it certainly is time consuming. Every appraiser generally rolls their eyes when they have a revision, and this one is one of the most time intensive on average revisions that come across is a reconsideration of value and additional data to consider. But hey, Jeff, you tell a story about surgeons and liability and cases that I think is really applicable here to appraisers in considering how they approach these.
We're on the same page. I was just thinking about that. And interestingly, we were talking to a chief appraiser of a meaningful organization who just had some medical issues. And what he discovered was it was the medical intern who was willing to literally put his hands on the patient and say, Does it hurt when I push here? Does it hurt when I push there? He took the time to figure out like what and ultimately was the source of his problem. And it all comes down to this bedside manner. I mean, A, are you engaged? B, do you care, and are you conveying that to the end user or not? And this chief appraiser had several kind of seasoned, tenured medical professionals who his perception was they came in, they took my heartbeat, they were here for a couple minutes, they left, they didn't find the problem, and he was very unsatisfied with that level of care. It was the new person who maybe didn't know any better that was actually digging in to try to solve the problem. And it would be wise for appraisers and best for the profession as a whole to take the time to give a level of care that if there really is something that warrants a deeper dive, then do the deeper dive and explain what you did and why. And at the end of the day, I think that those paying for the appraisal, those relying on the appraisal, those that have business relationships with the appraisal, have a reasonable expectation that the appraisers handle it, in that way.
Jeff, you must be full of medical analogy, because I was thinking of another one that you have, and I'll go ahead and tell that here. But
Please.
But it is, I really think about this from the appraiser's perspective as a tremendous opportunity to reduce liability in a dangerous time where someone has a pretty significant disagreement with the conclusion that you came to. And so you talk about, or have talked about in the past, the surgeon, the poor surgeon with good bedside manner, knowing how to interact with patients well, poor surgeon that knows how to interact with the patient well gets far less lawsuits than one that is good but doesn't handle patients well and doesn't interact well. And so, I hope that I said that clear, and please jump in if I haven't. But I think this is an opportunity for appraisers to have really good bedside manner and significantly reduce that liability.
Simple way to say it is you can leave your scalpel in the patient during the process when you sew them up. As long as you're nice about it, you're less likely to get sued than if you don't leave your scalpel in them, but you're a pain in the process, or just short or not, giving the level of care that they expect, pre and post op.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I think a lot of folks, the stakeholders in the industry, have asked for a delay of the ROV process. I think it's been delayed by about 30, 45, 60 days, sometime in October, from what we heard here at Valuation Expo and in releases from Fannie. So we have some time to stew on it a little bit, but I think overall this is going to be it's just codifying something that already exists. So not earth-shattering in that way, but I think that the structure is there and encouraging meaningful conversation when there is a disagreement, kind of out in front of serious problems, is really all for the better.
Yeah, exactly right. So it'll officially be the policy. What I saw from the Fannie Mae representative was in October. I think, in fact, it was October 31st. So it'll be a Halloween implementation. But if we get any other insights on that, scary as ROVs are sometimes for everybody involved, but we'll share updates there.
Yeah, great. Well, Jeff, so the ROV process was certainly among the discussions at Valuation Expo here in this week, August of 2024, that we were attending, and we thought we would cover in short some of the topics that were discussed here and what is on the minds of the appraisal industry right now, going through all of this. And I'll lead off with a topic that is interesting to me. I'm not sure it was intended to come off this way, but my note is unthreatening AI, unthreatening artificial intelligence, and it's kind of where I think artificial intelligence is right now in its threat to our industry and what appraisers do. And I maybe that's a little contrary to the shock of seeing what ChatGPT and these other language models can do. But I don't think we're anywhere near artificial intelligence kind of replacing the appraiser one way or another. And I think our industry is protected by a pretty unique outlook. And I think that current is a set of totally risk-averse stakeholders that any change that risks a value that's off course or whatever is just not worth it. And so you have to be so deep. And if anybody has been messing with these language models, especially I've seen someone, I think it's maybe Bill Gurley, I saw on a podcast, saying that language models are great at words and bad at math. And boy, a lot of what we need here is math. And it can be good at math. I've seen examples of it, but what I see is it's not consistently good at math, and so you've got to really check everything that's coming through. And so I think where AI is working to make an impact is image recognition, making even more stringent reviews of our appraisal products, but not putting our appraisal products together or replacing what it is we do. That's what I see. And so I think we're a long ways off, even as AI quickly gets better. I'll be right until I'm wrong, of course, and I'm prepared for that. I won't stop looking at it and considering it. But I do think, the topics covered along AI are, well, that can save you 20 seconds. Think about that if it labeled your photos for you in the field or something. Yeah, great. That's nice, but that's not replacing me.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard the whole gamut from, hey, you can fly a drone through a house today. The appraisers go over, it's done. There was a guy passionately arguing that side of it at one of the booths I was at, to an appraiser who was saying, hey, we're seeing some of our lender clients saying you can't use AI in your reports, or like a specific, stated prohibition on it. And so it's very much evolving technology. I think you and I are both having, I think, a interest in it. And so it'll be something that I think we touch on from time to time as far as what impact it's having. But at the end of the day, what appraisers do is try to interpret what humans are doing through math, through data, through science, through markets. And what you said resonated with me too. I mean, they can write very well through large language models. They don't do math, and I don't think they analyze and then interpret what that math means, on the back end. They might be able to talk about a remodeled house. They're not, anywhere near being able to extrapolate what the impact of a remodel might be in terms of market value, marketability, and things that appraiser clients care about.
This industry's lack of tolerance to change is, I would consider, an extreme thorn in my side. And damn it, I'm going to take this win where that intolerance to change is a good thing for me. So I'm going to take the win there and keep rolling with it, at least for the near future. So Jeff, the next topic that I had, that Valuation Expo's front and center was adjustment support. A lot of talk. There's a ton of companies that are working on the sort of, I guess, new interfaces at the age-old techniques that we have here. So what were your thoughts on all that discussion?
Yeah, in fact, it's interesting you mentioned that, Mark. I think the Freddie Mac representative was talking, had put on his slide that appraisers have access to at least 40 different tools to help do this very thing. And I think where this applies and what this means to more than just an appraiser audience is that appraisers have always had the responsibility to support what they do. And so oftentimes on Facebook groups, it's a pretty universal question. What does remodeling my kitchen do to the value of my home? What does adding this pool do to the value of my home? What is this addition? What is this whatever thing I'm thinking about doing to the property? How much value am I going to get out of that? And appraisers have always had the responsibility to extract that answer from the market, given the tools and the data that's available to them. Many times a consumer, a homeowner may look at it and say, well, I'm going to spend, and in these COVID years, maybe $100,000 putting a pool in my backyard, and their default assumption is if I spend it, then it must add that much value automatically to the property. A lot of it depends, and appraisers, often like to say, yeah, the answer to that question depends on a lot of things, but the one thing it never should have ever depended on is what they happen to think in a vacuum about it. It's the appraiser's responsibility. And so what they're talking about here is really just an emphasis of what always has been, but the users of appraisal reports are looking at it and expecting a higher level of analysis and support for what they're doing. And so in the appraiser space, we talk about supporting adjustments. And what that really means is being able to demonstrate from market information what you're saying is a material impact on the property, whether it's the difference in size, whether it's the garage, the differences in physical features of homes as you're comparing them. The appraiser needs to be able to point to data from the market and not just say, well, I've always done it this way, or I just think that this is what it is without, some evidence for what they think.
Jeff, I'm the efficiency guy with an eye towards serving the ultimate borrower the best, and that comes with speed, right? So how can we get our conclusions, quality conclusions, in the hands of the banks that are lending to the public in sort of about it in that way. So I would encourage all of these companies that are looking at this. You said 40 options out there. I bet there was 25 12 months ago, and it seems like there's a million folks coming out here and doing this. And I think because Fannie and Freddie are pushing this and saying, "Hey, this is where we're going." We've had them on our working lunches, and that's certainly the message we've heard. We've been doing that for years through available tools that are out there. But I think that what I would task everybody to or challenge everybody to do is to be thinking about how to get this adjustment support in the hands of the decision makers, the appraisers, with the least amount of time and noise distracting from the conclusion and the delivery of that appraisal product. If I got to spend an extreme 8 hours combing through a bunch of stuff, maybe I got a little bit more precise, but I'm not really sure that's the problem we're solving in the mortgage appraisal. And so, how do we get through this fast and replicate, be able to use this often on assignments and whatnot? That's what I think ultimately wins today.
But it certainly does, and it will help appraisers always be able to answer the question, what did you do and why? Why did you do it? It shouldn't take an especially long time to be able to answer that question, but appraisers need to have an answer for it. I think those that are making loans, that are selling properties, should have a reasonable expectation that an appraiser can answer that question. I adjusted for this thing at this amount, and here's why. They ought to be able to answer that question with the data that's part of the process.
And I think the message with this adjustment support, and I really think this helps establish the appraiser's role in the appraisal process. The message to mortgage loan officers and realtors is, look, this is not finger in the wind application of stuff to arrive at a kind of desired conclusion. I mean, it's got to all be supported. And, there are reasons why we can't just raise that pool adjustment from 30,000 to 70,000 with them paying 120 or whatever it is. I mean, there has to be method behind our practice there. And so, I think the stronger the support we have in what we're doing, the harder it is to refute and the less acceptable answers in those individual decisions that we have up there, which is really where we need to be.
Yep, absolutely. Next month, I'll be back in Vegas speaking at another appraiser conference about this very topic. How can appraisers do what they should be doing in the first place? So it'll be fun to dive into it, but there's more than, like you say, just the finger in the wind approach. That's not what they ever should have been doing, and increasingly there's scrutiny around making sure that that's not what's happening.
You bet. Well, a couple more items that I took note of here, Jeff. Was some hope. In fact, just by the attendance at the Val Expo, I think it was maybe a 1% or 2% higher attendance than last year, and that's probably fairly meaningful. Maybe, I don't know, but it's a little bit more than last year, and I think just being more than last year was better. I think that's because of some optimism in the market that this historically terrible mortgage rate environment that has led to a historically still marketplace in terms of loan applications and mortgage applications is hopefully coming to an end. I talk to a lot of appraisers here that feeling what I'm feeling, which is that the marketplace is unpredictably more quiet than I thought it would be, and that it was even 3 months ago when it was historically terrible. I think there is a growing confidence that the Fed is going to reduce rates sometime this year. I think the market is way more optimistic than I am that that'll happen in September, and that it'll be large and many when it comes over. I'm not so sure of that. We just came off with some strong numbers this week. I think it was. I don't remember if it was jobs or inflation numbers themselves, but yeah. So I think there was optimism. We share in that to some degree. I think that the buyer has quit generally right now, and I think it is affordability and expectation of a better deal not long from now, whether it is depreciation in price or mortgage rate price reduction. So that's what I think. I'm not sure the first rate does a whole heck of a lot. I think anything is better than nothing for sure. But I did note some optimism coming soon, but none of that impacting volumes today.
Yeah, and we've seen some decent reductions in mortgage interest rates even ahead of the Fed making any changes, and it hasn't yet translated into a meaningful uptick in overall mortgage volumes. I think is a lot of what you're speaking to, Mark. And it was interesting. They had an economist that was here talking, and he acknowledged he was a little bit against the grain, but he was saying, "Hey, I put maybe a 40 or 50% chance that the Fed cuts it all in September." Where I think markets on a larger scale, perhaps baked in as a near certainty. Now, he did say he would put in an 80 or 90% chance that by the end of the year, the Fed cuts their target rate by approximately 75 basis points. So he's expecting something on the order of what I think the market is, but maybe not as quickly as what's been talked about and kind of generally accepted. So it was an interesting, somewhat contrarian position in the near term, but I think a similar outlook in the long term. And everyone I talked to was saying 2025 seems to be shaping up to be better in terms of interest rates and volumes, but it may not just be right around the corner like we'd all love for it to be.
75 basis point reduction or predictions. Sweet words to these ears here. So I hope that happens. Looking forward to those times. So that's great. So I think we'll be covering in this podcast in upcoming episodes. We'll be talking a lot about the economy, at least right now, as things become more stable. Maybe a little less so, but boy, it is such volatile times right now, and we're all so dependent on what Chairman Powell does. So Jeff, the last item I had at Valuation Expo was the UAD forms. A lot of talk about that for years now. It's hard to organize your business around that hearing of a lot of that talk and change coming. What do you hear there? What do you think?
So one of the things that's interesting is this thing keeps getting pushed out from what we've seen in terms of its implementation. And one of my real takeaways from just listening to stakeholders here is that appraisers care about this thing they call UAD, Uniform Appraisal Data Set. But what I'm realizing is that it touches a lot more than just appraisers. It has to do with mortgage intake. It has to do with the applications, with the lending process. Fannie and Freddie do more than just look at appraisals. They buy loans that get packaged by the time they're funded, and they're trying to standardize the data in the process to make it more streamlined end to end. So the impact is going to be felt in the lending community. I'm sure that the loan officers are kind of being updated as we are on this end. The implementation keeps getting pushed out, and I think our last update here was it's not going to be a hard requirement until into 2026 or beyond. And so it because it's so impactful, it just is something that they want to make sure they have right. And because they're wanting to make sure they get right, it just keeps taking longer than anticipated.
Yep. Yeah, I don't think I have much more to add to that, Jeff. I think I have taken an approach. I'm not building software around it, so I don't have that necessity, I guess. But been taking a wait and see as we get close. Going to dive in head first and deep, but waiting for all of this to get in. It feels like an exhausting amount of data that is being included in this on the subject properties, and I am sure that the GSEs would really benefit from that. And if that's what they decide they need, we will certainly be doing that with full optimism and effort. But boy, it seems like a lot and a little overkill from my perspective. But I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of it yet, and I think the point and the takeaway that I've got is that pushed off, and that is the word again here. It's a big undertaking, and no criticism by any of that. I'm glad everybody's taking their time. Hopefully, it has the biggest impact, but the least intrusion into the process that is working pretty well. All right, great. Well, so Valuation Expo, great experience, great conference put on. Appreciated being there. It was great to connect with people. I hadn't been there in several years, and so it was nice to see friends and peers and whatnot. So good there. The last topic that I had on the list here to discuss, Jeff, was what I'll call Peria Hesitancy. Peria is I can never. I'm covering. I have a full season of podcasts on this, but Peria Hesitancy. So. Peria being this new pathway to gain experience to become an appraiser. Jeff and I have been pretty supportive of that, really coming from working with and interviewing appraisers for 2 decades, or trainees, aspiring appraisers, trying to get into the business, and it being so difficult. And this provides an opportunity for folks that really want to get in. And so we've been covering that topic at length. And what we wanted to cover today was, all along this process, we're hearing a lot of feedback of Peria hesitancy, concern about the program, concern about competition, kind of finding an easier path into the marketplace, and states that have concern concerned that the training won't be as good as what happens out there right now. And so we've got a recent occurrence of a state saying, you know what, I'm not so sure I'm going to approve this like the other 38 or 40 states around the country. Let's talk a little more about that. Jeff, what are you hearing? What are you hearing out of the state of Oregon?
Yeah, so I had an interesting conversation with a couple of people, a representative from the Appraisal Institute, one of the newer members on that board, and it was just really interesting because they described, having sat in on the last Oregon appraisal board call, a process that's very similar to what we went through several years ago on our state board in Utah. For us, what for me was a very healthy discussion and kind of a robust debate around, hey, this thing's untested, it's unproven. How do we know it's going to be any better? What are the concerns versus what are the potential upsides and positives with it? And at the end of the day, our healthy discussion, I think, led to us taking responsible action, which was to approve it and then continue to watch it to see how it evolves. Now, in our state, we actually don't even have any PAREA students yet, even in the program. Oregon, having gone through that same kind of debate process just recently, was, I believe, from at least the accounting I've heard of those on the call, was about to just vote it down, but have decided to table it until a future board meeting. And in the meantime, they've invited some representatives to come and I think share some specific details and information about what the program is, how does it work, the level of scrutiny, in a humble brag, maybe, I guess. I'll say that I know that this podcast and some of our previous episodes around PAREA specifically have been shared with some that we're having that debate as a way to try to just provide some insight into what this thing really is and what it isn't. If you're going to make a decision, you ought to make it based on the truth and the facts of the matter, as opposed to a perception that isn't informed by the realities of what it is and what it isn't. So that's underway. I'm hopeful that an education campaign will, shed light on it for those making the decisions to a point to realize that it's not what they were perceiving it to be at the time.
I've, as it's turned out, I think one of the more powerful videos or episodes that we recorded is with the two graduates who were good, honest, hardworking people that saw a new path, jumped right on it, took the bull by the horns, and got it done, and are appraisers now. And I think the program itself, nameless, faceless, is easy not to think too much about the good that can happen. But I think meeting those folks, for me, really solidifies the good that's coming out of this, and the good that can happen can bring good folks here that might not otherwise get in or would get in much later than they would. So, both of those folks are working with experienced appraisers on their own decision to do that and get further training that they'll need coming out of PAREA. So great there. And I was answering a commenter on our YouTube episode of someone that was asking, I believe they're in the state of Georgia, and PAREA is not approved there yet. It was wondering what to do. They wanted to take PAREA, and I was asking some folks a little bit about that. Scott DiBiasio, who handles government affairs with the Appraisal Institute, and it, at the time, just recently here, the subject of PAREA has been put on the docket. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but basically is the topic is up for discussion and consideration now amongst the state of Georgia to either get voted up, which I hope is likely, or ultimately voted down, which I think is unlikely. But that's probably a year-long process. And I think really interesting to hear that the state of Georgia has said that, and actually done this in an instance, that while they don't have PAREA approved, and it's going to take a while to get through the wheels of government there, that they have approved someone that got a license in a neighboring state, maybe South Carolina, that has approved PAREA, and then given reciprocity to that appraiser who just recently got licensed by way of PAREA, so that they ultimately ended up with a Georgia license. And so I thought that was interesting. I don't know if Oregon would consider that one way or another, but those are ways to help folks get into appraisal that have done the work and gotten the experience at least accepted by Foundation and other states around the country. So I thought it was a pretty creative idea. It's out there in a place like Texas. That didn't make a lot of sense because it takes me 9 hours to get out of the state. I drive, so it doesn't make sense here. But in those places where state borders pretty close, maybe it makes some sense to do.
Yeah, and though that application here applies to the getting licensed through PAREA specifically, I've seen that kind of thing happen before. States will have some unique barriers to entry, or things you have to do in one state but not in another. most states will allow for what they call reciprocal licensing, where if I have a license or I'm certified in one state, I can just apply through that and get it approved in another state. And I've seen that in my state. I've seen that in others, where people who don't want to jump through a certain hoop that's required in one place but not another, will kind of end around and just get the certification in one place and then apply for the reciprocal license in the state where they really want it. Noteworthy in that conversation, a representative from the appraisal subcommittee who kind of audits the states and their licensing specifically was just observing, hey, we've been asked through the PAVE task force to make sure that states aren't putting up unnecessary barriers to entry. And he was willing to come to Oregon and at least talk about that potential implication of, if a majority of the states have approved it and you guys are not, it's a barrier to getting people's credentialed in your state that most others are eliminating. And whenever your oversight official is coming in and taking a look like that, it does get your attention as well. So we'll report on what we hear, TBD on that as far as the outcome, but it's not dead in the water at this point.
State of Oregon, we love you. We hope you end up seeing things the way we do. We think it's a great thing. So it would be great if you guys reach that conclusion. So good stuff. Well, Jeff, I think that concludes episode 1 here. Would love to get feedback from any of the tens of listeners that are paying attention to this on this format and discussing topics. Any topics you'd like us to hit on or discuss, we'd be happy to do that. So enjoyed recording this one with you and look forward to more recordings to come.
Love it. We know our moms like this podcast. Everybody else out there listening, let them know what they think. But fun topics, and we're enjoying it regardless of how many are watching. So appreciate it, Mark.
Take care.